Thank you so much, Mayor and Council, for the guidance on this annexation guidelines. So there are several items I would like to share with you, one of which is on the agenda to talk about contracts. But before doing so, I would like to share just a few other issues with you. One of the items that I think you probably have been able to see that I do at least once a month is give you an overview of all of the activities you have been engaged with as it relates to your goals. Since we've completed the month of January, I would like to just do a recap for you and share with you all of the different approvals you provided as it relates to economic development, water, as well as streets. So in January, as it relates to economic development, you did three things. You approved the creation of the Type B Corporation. You approved the downtown development agreement for the Frost Bank building and the AEP utility upgrades at Stonewater Properties. And you also approved the lease agreement with the CVB for this year's Fiesta de la Flora event. In water, you did four things. You approved the construction contract to continue protection of the Mirror Rose Pipeline Phase 1. You continued the O.N. Stevens Water Treatment Plant improvements with the purchase of new equipment. You also revised the city's drought contingency plan to include a reservoir stage system, and you approved the third-party inspection reporting system for backflow preventers and a supply agreement for brass fittings for the water department. And in streets, you did four things. You approved an additional $3.4 million to be dedicated to residential streets. You approved the construction contract for Yorktown Boulevard from Lake Travis Drive to Everhart. You also approved the master service agreement for geotechnical and construction material testing, and you also changed the ordinance to extend warranties on new streets to 2 years. I just want you to know that you approved a lot of different items in conjunction with the goals that you've established for the community. And I like to always do a recap just to make sure everyone's aware of what you've done. The next item is in reference to Warrant Roundup. The municipal court would like to remind everyone that the 2018 Great Texas Warrant Roundup is now underway. Now through Friday, February 23rd, individuals with warrants can take care of their fines without concerns of arrests. Municipal court offers payment options as well as community service opportunities for those who qualify. For more information or to see if you have a warrant, please visit www.cctexas.com/warrant roundup. More information should be provided if you go to that site. Bond 2012 Staples Street public meeting. So the engineering services is hosting a public meeting for Bond 2012 Prop 1 Staples Street Improvement Project at 5:30 this Thursday at Lindell Senior Center, which is at 3135 Swantner Street. So the purpose of the public meeting is to be able to present information regarding the upcoming construction improvements. And the last item before the contract management presentation is in reference to the North Beach open house. The planning department will be hosting an open house for the North Beach redevelopment initiatives at Fajitaville this Thursday, February the 15th, from noon to 6:30 p.m. The open house is going to feature 2 draft conceptual designs of North Beach developed from community meetings and citizen feedback. Those are the items I wanted you to be aware of, Council. The last item is in reference to contract management, and it is actually on the agenda for comments after the presentation or during the presentation. But this is a follow-up from a meeting that we've given a presentation to you on this item before, but we wanted to refine it a little. And I would like for Ms. Kim Baker to please come forward and give the presentation regarding contract management.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Kim Baker, Assistant Director of Financial Services, Purchasing Division. Hope your stomach's not growling as loud as mine is. You can pardon me if you hear some growling, that's what's going on. Okay, as Ms. Rose mentioned, last November we came forward late in the evening. I know everybody was very tired. It'd been a long day. And we tried to broach this subject of contract management just to give you an idea, because there's a lot of concerns about contract management, and we get that. We all understand that we have to be very careful about spending money right now. We're looking for every opportunity we can to save money, and a lot of the purchasing and the contract management that we do here at the city helps us with that mission. So back in November, here are some things just real quickly that we talked about. We talked about the fact that there are approximately 650 contracts that come through council every year for approval. So there's a large volume of contracts that we deal with. We often include contract options with these contract awards because it provides efficiencies to the city, and I think everybody gets that. It also allows the city manager the authority to execute those options so we can keep those services or those goods coming. The options are basically at the sole discretion of the city. So the vendor's not entitled to that option, but certainly it makes it more attractive to the vendor to have a longer term deal. And we feel like sometimes we get better pricing when the deal is longer. One of the other challenges we have that we're trying to overcome is that all of our contracts are currently in a decentralized method of tracking and management, meaning the departments monitor, administer, manage those contracts. We have some very high-level oversight from the standpoint of how much they've spent, when they are going to expire, but the day-to-day management of those contracts are done, what I call in the field or by the departments. So what things have we done? What are the updates to our contract management systems? Basically, as you've seen, the agenda memos, we've made improvements there. We tried to be a lot more transparent about those options and what the total contract value would be at the end of the day, so you can see real clearly what it is you're approving, how much money you're approving for that particular vendor or that particular item. The other thing that we've really done, and you may not see this as much as we do, we've really moved away from a lot of repetitive, small, one-time purchases, and we're trying to accumulate things and actually put them in service or supply agreements, which has increased the number of contracts that we have and really increased our efficiencies, because we were taking like 16,000 bites at the apple, meaning we had 16,000 POs, purchase orders, in FY15 and only 10 in 16. So that's how much of a reduction it makes in all the little tiny pieces of purchasing that we've done, and makes it a lot more efficient. So what other continuous improvement items are we looking at to help in this area? One that I mentioned before, and I think it sounded like a lead balloon, and I wanted to expand on a little bit, and that is to make the contracts more visible to you during the budget process. We started dabbling in this a little bit when we did the zero-based budgeting, and then it kind of fell off last year, and I think we've recognized we need to bring that back. We can't really build our budgets if we don't have a really good handle on how many contracts do we have, when do they expire, what are we going to do with those contracts in the next year. So we're going to try to make that a lot more visible in this budget cycle, so you get a better feel for what each department has. We're also moving to more 2 to 5 year agreements to allow for better contract economy. Instead of doing 1-year contracts with options, doing a 2-year contract or 3-year contract. And the reason for that is sometimes with these options, the vendor has a choice too. So we may really need that product or that service. The vendor can just say no and then walk away. And it leaves us in a bind to try to get that service to continue. We realized that we need to establish more training for our departments in the contract management area, and we're working towards that goal this year. We're looking at partnering with maybe Del Mar as example to help us put those training classes on so that we can pump the staff through the training and help them understand how to better manage their contracts. We're also looking at a centralized tracking database. We do have the capability in Infor to do that. Right now, it's on a voluntary basis, but we do have a lot of departments that are participating. They're bringing their contracts to us. We're loading them into the system so that everybody has visibility on those contracts. The other thing we wanted to remind you is that you always have the flexibility when we bring a contract forward and we have options on it, and it's a large contract, to amend what we're asking for. So if we ask you for a 1-year agreement with 4 1-year options, and it's going to take us to $10 million to get that contract done, you may get uncomfortable with that, and we're okay with that. So if you want to pare it back and say, I'm good with 1 year and 2 options, you have that flexibility at any time to amend on the floor what we're requesting of you. And then we also said, if there's still a concern, if you still feel very concerned about us having options or doing these extensions, we could certainly look at setting a threshold on those. And we just had some suggestions, like we might put $500,000 on non-construction, $2 million on construction, just as a suggestion. But that's only, again, if there's still a concern over having the options and the amendments. So basically, that's all I had for you today, and I stand by for any questions or comments or feedback that you may have.
Anybody have Ms. Opal?
Well, this was an item that I had mentioned, and I really appreciate you guys bringing it back. I look at this, and the challenge is, as I'm seeing it, the 650 basically would translate into about 20 contracts a meeting. Right?
Yes, like 18.
So
yes.
18, I'm being generous,
yes.
up and down.
Yes.
So it could definitely create a lot more points of discussion I think we have some on our agenda today, they're chemicals that we put in our water. We're going to need those chemicals. Mm-hmm. So if we buy them this way or that way. I think the question that I had, and I think perhaps some of the other council members, they can speak for themselves, is that once we make this commitment, we need some way just to double check. Mm-hmm. The council has the responsibility to manage the finances in some way and be fiscally responsible back to the citizens. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if we want to create, as you said in the last option, hey, if it's going to end up being more than $500,000, it's going to show up this way. And I'm not exactly sure what that best way would be, but I would be open to suggestions that you would have to say, hey, we'll send you a report 6 months in advance and say these are the ones that are going to be coming up. Because at the end of the day, too, if we as the council all of a sudden get down to that level of detail, then you could easily end up without a contract at all.
Correct.
Because although Mr. Edmonds magically created a barge dock contract for us, that's not necessarily going to happen every time.
Right.
So I think that we certainly appreciate that we don't want to create unnecessary work for the staff, yet at some point, I think there's a level of comfort that the council might have in seeing what's coming up, just as a proactive look. Mm-hmm. The other question I would have is we keep talking about this contract manager type function in the city, and I know at one time we had a position budgeted in the city and it got dropped out, and I would just like to see how this might look in the future. I mean, it's an important piece that can literally pay for itself when you have a contract that's well managed and doesn't get away from it. I think the engineering department has a whole structure where, you're pumping quite a bit of money through that department. So there may be some ways to learn from what they do. I realize it's not identical,
right. But
on the flip side of the normal purchasing and procurement side, to find out if we can look at that, and then it could carry on to other contracts. I know the SMG contract was one that generated a lot of discussion on this council about some things that may have been overlooked. So I think that proficiency is something I would still say would be important. Cross-platform. I love the education. I love the fact that the departments will learn a little bit more about that discipline because it really does take a little bit different eye to critically look at those. So thank you very much for this. And I would say the next step from my standpoint would be maybe to look at what might be a policy statement or a framework, and maybe it's a council policy at that point. Council wants to see if it looks like this, if it seems like there's a desire on the council to do that.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Molina?
Thank you. When we're looking at these agenda items to approve contracts, some of these include multi-year extensions. Is the funding for these extensions included in the original agenda items when we approve them?
So the way it's set up is we'll be asking, the funding is available for that particular fiscal year. Everything else shows up in the table, usually on the second page, as future year funding. So, and then all of our contracts have appropriation clauses in there, meaning if for some reason there is no funding, the funding gets pulled, the contract can basically be dissolved because it has an appropriation clause contained in it. So all the funding for future years are in future year budgets. That's why we think it's important to look at it again during the budget process.
And those future year funds, those are coming out of the respective departments?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, well,
You know, Mayor, I think from a council perspective, and maybe clarity for staff, is, I mean, are we comfortable doing it on a contract-by-contract basis? Because basically, if we don't give them any direction at this point, if I were staff, that's what I would be looking at. So if anyone on the council wants to see a different approach on the way we're managing these contracts, I think now would be the time to have that discussion with the staff, because I think that's basically what you're asking for, isn't it, Ms. Rose? Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm not, asking for more. This is not a council of one, it's a council of 9, or the majority. So if you have the comments on it, and if we're comfortable with the way it is today, then you guys are on the right track. If not, I think the staff would need to hear direction on where to go.
Mr. Hunter?
I think that we should continue to look at options of multi-year contracts in areas that we haven't visited them before. I like the idea for some of the single-year contracts. If it's working out very well, sure, don't waste any time in it. But I think Council Member Lindsay Opal is correct in that there's some areas that we can fix. Just because the world's changing, there's new opportunities every day, and just last year, iPhone 15 came out, and I don't know if we're on 20 this year already, but you get the point. Things are changing, and
Right.
I think there's always opportunities to improve, so thank you.
All right, any other comments? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Rose, do you have any other thing in the city manager's report?
That's it. Thank you very much.
All right.